No, we'll save that take for a little bit later. But I will say we've had some bad years and some bad times, but there's some other people that are having some worse years because there's a seat out there that's sort of heating up out in college football land, and
Moving from hot takes
to
to
the
hot
hot
seats.
seat. There are some people sitting down on the hot seat. So we're gonna go through. We have one, two, three, four, five coaches that are sitting there on the hot seat. So Connor, take us through our first coach, who we at Front Stream Sports think needs to kind of watch theirself out there.
And these are NCAA, these are college football coaches. So we are shifting our tone here a little bit to some college football talk, talking about coaches on the hot seats. So our first coach that is up on the hot seat that we're going to touch base on is our dear friend, former Vanderbilt Commodore, current Penn State Nittany Lion, James Franklin over at Penn State.
Yeah. Take me through why Penn State is doing so bad.
This year, it's easy to kind of chalk up this year to, COVID and some of those pieces. And here's going to be a theme through as we talk about multiple coaches, right? You go take a pretty good program in the Big Ten, right? And Penn State hasn't been, they haven't been their national title, contenders of the 90s and the early 2000s and things like that. But what do you got to do? You got to go beat Ohio State. You got to beat Ohio State consistently. You got to look more like Ohio State than Wisconsin when it comes to NFL quality players out there on the field. And outside of a really bad year this year, Penn State over and over and over again, just has they don't beat Ohio State, and they're a 3-loss team, maybe a 4-loss team year in, year out.
Mm-hmm.
And that can only go for so long. So that's my quick take on James Franklin. What do you think?
I remember when I watched James Franklin go on SVP and Rosillo, which is one of my favorite sports talk shows, and he said, this is during his Vandy days, I'm at the best academic school and the best conference in college football. Why aren't you at my school? And I said, I like this guy. And then he left and went to Penn State. And it's like, what are you doing to build your legacy there? Sitting at a 56-28 record, if you flip through his schedule, all they really do to make him seem like a legitimate coach is beat up hard on their cakewalk schedule teams. They'll put up 50 points, 40 points, maybe 60 points against bad teams. But then he'll do things like go into double overtime with App State. Like you said, they haven't beaten Ohio State since 2016. While they kind of have 10-win seasons, they're not contending for anything. And they're hardly sort of ever relevant. I was reading their records, and I was like, oh, look at you go. This is great. But no, you collapse at all of the wrong times. So I think Franklin is in for some problems. Someone else is in for some problems is our favorite school to rip on here at Friend Stream Sports, and that is the not-so-victors of Michigan and Jim Harbaugh.
Michigan.
So before we talk about what is wrong at Michigan, why does the world love Jim Harbaugh, Connor? Because besides having Andrew Luck and building a questionable Stanford program into relevancy, what is he, and maybe getting San Francisco to a Super Bowl, what else is there to this guy?
It is difficult to get a team to a Super Bowl, so a little credit there. But I think that part of it is that Harbaugh has a shtick. I think that the khaki pants thing, as silly as it might sound, we love a team with a shtick. We love a coach with a shtick. We love a guy with it. We love the turnover chain. So I think that, as weird as it might sound, the fact that Jim Harbaugh always sports khaki pants and has had some pretty good records over the years has given him some publicity with the fans. I think part of it too being the quote Michigan man, right, which is why Rich Rodriguez left or was never fully embraced. He wasn't that quote Michigan man. I think that has given him more time in Michigan, even though really he has underperformed the most at Michigan. So I think that's kind of qualitatively, if you will, some of those pieces there on Harbaugh. But Rutledge, I know you've got some nice stats from our stat machine, thanks to hopeful sponsor Google.
Yes.
Talk through a little bit of some of your stats about Harbaugh.
So Jim Harbaugh, to me, his time at Michigan is just that fan in the yellow hoodie after they lost to Michigan State with his hands on his head. Which, shout out to our viewer, Slaney. I watched that live with him. But Harbaugh, he's 78-42, which you say, that sounds great. But they're 1-5 in bowl games, and he went to a triple overtime with Rutgers. So when you're sort of having that situation where you have maybe a stacked sort of record, but you have nothing to prove for it, and you choke later in the postseason, and they really struggle against Ohio State and Michigan State, there's not much to show for it. And I think the fan base has really sort of bowed their time in hope for we don't know what we're supposed to have, and he's going to be tucking in a different sweater into khakis soon.
Yeah, they yet again. That's another team. That's another coach that needs to look more like Ohio State than Wisconsin, and just doesn't do it. So next up, Rutledge, talk about Les Miles, and I do have a soft spot for the Jayhawks, but talk about Les Miles over Kansas.
Les Miles in Kansas. Before we go into Les Miles at Kansas, remember how weird it got at LSU near the end? With Les Miles, it got really sort of strange, and LSU was great, and he was contending for championships and doing really, really well. And then all of a sudden, Kansas sort of fell off, and LSU fell off and didn't do good. Like he got into the middle of a season, got fired in the middle of the year, and now he's trying to take a Kansas program that was not doing well, and it's getting worse. They have multiple losses where they haven't even scored 10 points. And I just think that this isn't a program fit for him. I think they tried to go out and get a big name for their school to try to relive the 2008 glory days. But I think that Kansas and Mike and Les Miles are not a marriage made for anyone. What do you take of it?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's not like Kansas can't win football games. Even besides... And I know it's a while back now, but even besides their Orange Bowl back in 2008, they weren't horrible. I think you can chalk some of that up to the cupboard being pretty bare recruiting wise and having some real issues recruiting. In LSU being around such great high school football, you could kind of, you could walk in with your LSU hoodie and throw a rock and hit a 5-star recruit. It felt like so. There's some issues there, but man, Les has got to start showing some signs of improvement with that Jayhawk program here soon. So, why don't you share, Rutledge, a little bit here about Tom Herman staying in the Big 12?
Oh, Tom Herman is... I remember when Tom Herman got hired at Texas, and Tom Herman was not there when Texas was back, folks, was the popular quote of Labor Day weekend. Tom Herman, who's 30-17 in Texas. Houston was amazing when he was there. You thought they could go against and play with anybody, but Tom Herman is the type of coach. By the way, we have twin boys staying at my house for all of our listeners, and they just woke up. Tom and Herman was the type of coach to where he's one of those small school coaches to where his system works at a small school, and kind of like a Mike Leach program where he has a system where it can beat slower, less talented players, but it's not going to work in the big boy league, and it's shown by his inconsistency against Oklahoma, and they're sort of lost to winnable games. One of their struggle wins was against Kansas, so I think that Tom Herman got put into too big of a job, and Texas is not the fit for him. He needs to be in somewhere that's a little more where his schemes and his staff can kind of outwit the other team and not just depend on the recruiting and the talent to just beat the other team.
Amen to that. So, Texas is maybe not back just yet. So what do we think about David Shaw here?
David Shaw, let's all remember that David Shaw walked into Jim Harbaugh's roster and had Andrew Luck, and he also had Christian McCaffrey in his time, and both of those dudes are household NFL names. But outside of once he loses that roster, Connor, you have a great quote. You said you have to have good plays work with good players, and when you have two different teams that have good players, they're going to do good things. But they're in the Pac-12, which is not a strong conference. They got crushed last year. Their defense sort of fell apart. And their last bowl game was against Pitt, but it was a 17-13 win. And anytime you play a struggle game against Pitt, that's not a good sign for you. So I think David Shaw is... Oh, and I just threw a pick. I think in typical Lions Thanksgiving Day fashion, trying to win it late and throws a pick. I think David Shaw is... he just doesn't have the talent coming to him. And I think that he's sort of played his course, but I think he also lucked into having the good players to keep him afloat. What do you think of David Shaw?
You know, I remember hearing a quote from David Shaw. Due to the academic elements of Stanford, David Shaw every year, in essence, has a 3 scholarship restriction because you have to some schools you don't have to qualify. You can kind of, literally football players can kind of get skirted by without maybe hitting the standards academically of other schools. Stanford is not a school like that. They're kind of like, you got your Vanderbilt, your Stanford, and your Northwestern, right? And I think in some ways, even David Shaw, for David Shaw to make a bowl eligible on average, I just threw a pick here in Connor fashion. We're doing by the way,
always coming down to the wire in the fourth quarter.
When we're doing an immovable object versus another immovable object, in that I always lose to Rutledge from some unexplainable thing, and Rutledge is playing as the Lions, so something is going to give here. But I think David Shaw, should he turn it around? Yes, but he does have a lot of struggles. He might be the coach on this with maybe just a warm seat, maybe not necessarily a hot seat, but man, it is nice to see. It is always good to have a good I like having a good Stanford. I think it's fun out there in the Pac-12. Put another team out up north besides just an Oregon or a Washington to give balance to that conference. But
or a USC.
Well, yeah, I'm saying up north, and when you think of Pac-12, you think of all the Southern California schools. Sometimes Arizona State making some noise, maybe a little bit. But, north, you kind of got your powers up north, and it's always good to have a fun Stanford team. That night game against SCs, there's a lot of fun games. But without that, it's kind of, you wish Stanford was better than they were. That's for sure. So,
exactly.
What do you think as we hit into our final? I know you got a hot take here.
Oh man, I have one more hot seat.
Take for us?
Oh man, my one hot take, someone I think who their seat is heating up, is I'm going to go on a very passionate rant here and talk about Mr. Kirby Smart at the University of Georgia. And Kirby Smart, I think he is showing that the fundamentals of his coaching staff are really sort of struggling. And I think he had Mark Richt's very top talent. That coaching staff under Richt could really recruit. But when you lose to Nick Saban 2 major games in a row with the same trick of, we're going to switch our quarterback at the half, and you're not going to know what to do with it, and it works twice. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on your coaching staff. I think the University of Georgia world is seeing very slowly but surely that the lack of offensive identity in Athens, as well as that the only person to come out of there, Hot Rod Blankenship, while a cool dude, is not a legacy, and I think Kirby Smart's seat will heat up in the next year or two.